On today's podcast, we're going into one of the elements, the last element that is within our control as leaders and as cultures. This episode is the final of a 4-step series that we've been doing about this idea of the Great Resignation. And each episode has been dedicated to a different element that is within our control. In the midst of a time that so much feels out of our control, what is within our control as leaders and as teams and as organizations related to what we've been experiencing with the Great Resignation? In the acronym RAD, we've been talking about retaining talent and attracting talent. Today, it's the last one. It's D, developing talent. And the reality is that we can't create the future cultures we want without developing people intentionally and authentically. And so we're going to talk about on today's podcast the things that the best organizations are doing to develop the talent in the midst of the Great Resignation. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everybody, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are, however you're coming to the podcast today, welcome back. So glad you're here. If you are one of the OGs that have been with us from the very beginning, welcome back. So glad you are still along the journey with us and continue to move forward with us. And if you are new to the podcast, welcome. So glad you are here making time for this. My commitment to you always is that I want this to be a space in your day, in your week, in your month. Every time you're listening to this, a time for you to step back, to think, and to, be filled with positive thoughts around what it is that you are trying to create in the world, who it is that you're trying to be, and the culture that you're trying to create with the people around you. So I keep sharing this, that I'm more convinced of this than ever, that in the world that we're living in, especially all that's been happening over the last couple of years, that authentic leadership, all of us showing up authentically with the people around us in our life and work, and then creating compelling cultures, that is needed more than ever in the world, and people are certainly thirsty for it. So if you do me a quick favor, I hate that I have to say this, but again, if you're a listener to this, you know, and if you're somebody out there who's been listening to this for a while and you haven't done this yet, this might be the time. Thank you, please, for taking the time. Even if you're new to the podcast, I hate this, but this is the way the algorithms work. The only way that this podcast continues to spread and more people can find it is when we rate it. So if you can, on every platform, podcast platform you're listening to this, if you can rate it 5 stars, please, that'd be great. If you can leave a nice review about your feelings and authentically your thoughts about it, that would be great. And if you can tell the people in your life and work about it, however that is, your colleagues, your team, anybody that you think ought to be a part of this, share messages with them, amplify on social media. All of those ways, rating, reviewing, sharing, that's the way that the podcast gets amplified, and I appreciate anybody that takes the time to do that. We are in the midst, in fact, today, this episode is the final of a 4-step series that we've been doing about this idea of the Great Resignation. And each episode has been dedicated to a different element that is within our control. In the midst of a time that so much feels out of our control, what is within our control as leaders and as teams and as organizations related to what we've been experiencing with the Great Resignation? Again, the Great Resignation, that phrase is all the talk recently, and if you aren't familiar with it, or if you just need a quick refresher, then what I would share with you is that it's referring to the 30 million people that from April to November of 2021 that have just up and quit their jobs, and they just, that's been now referred to as the Great Resignation. And so we're going to be talking about that. So on today's podcast, we're going into one of the elements, the last element, at least, that we're identifying on this podcast that is within our control as leaders and as cultures, in dealing with and everything that's within our control as it relates to the Great Resignation. And that is in the acronym RAD. We've been talking about retaining talent and attracting talent. Today, it's the last one. It's D, developing talent. And the reality is that we can't create the future cultures we want without developing people intentionally and authentically. And so we're going to talk about on today's podcast the things that the best organizations are doing to develop the talent in the midst of the Great Resignation. But let's take a quick break, a pause, and we'll be right back with today's episode. Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. All right, so we're talking about, again, the Great Resignation with 30 million people from April to November of 2021 that up and quit their jobs. And, of course, this caused many leaders, teams, companies, organizations, just human beings in general to ask the question of why is this happening? Why? And as we've shared about on other podcasts, it's complex. There is no simple one answer to it. I don't have the answers. Nobody else has all the answers to that. And the reality is that it's a myriad of different reasons. But we also know that everything that's been happening in the world over the last couple of years, so certainly a global pandemic, and then other just high-stress world events, politically, economically, socially, all those things have impacted us as humans and the way that we think and the way that we're responding in the world. And so there's been a bit of a psychological shift that studies and many people have identified in terms of why then 30 million people up and just quit their jobs. And so part of that mindset shift or that psychological shift that they identify is moving from this kind of the most important thing in my life is my work and my job and my career. And then I kind of build my life around this job, this work, and this idea that I'm going to do it as hard as I can until I quote unquote retire. And then once I retire, I get to do what I want to do. That shifting of the mindset that the world events has caused is causing people to actually then think, no, I want my life, the life that I'm trying to create to be first. And I want the work that I do, the contributions I make, the role that I play to fit into this greater picture for my life. And so the research is telling us that employees are voicing that they want a job that fits into their life, not the other way around. We also know the research that we've been citing on these podcasts. We know the Gallup study that said 9 out of every 10 employees now say they'd take a pay cut to work for a more meaningful culture, that, hey, I just want to be a part of a more meaningful culture. That's what I'm seeking. And so the research tells us that people want meaning. They want purpose. They want to feel like they are part of a more meaningful culture. They feel like they want to be a part of a place that listens to them, that values them as a human being, not just as somebody who, does a particular role or job, and that they feel like they are contributing to something greater than themselves. So a place where their workplace honors their life. And then they can contribute their skills, their talents, that job description. They want to be a part of something bigger. Also, Bloomberg Business did a study that showed that in the midst of all these people quitting their jobs, of the millennials, those people ages 25 to 40 currently, of those people that quit their jobs in 2021, 66% of them on their way out the door, they cited mental health reasons. That's why they were quitting. And then Gen Z, that's 20 people, anybody 24 or younger, that percentage was even higher. They said 81% of the people that quit their jobs, they cited, this isn't good for my mental health. I got to get out of this. And so obviously the world and the events of the world, so much is filled out of our control as humans. And the environment has been stressful, it's been uncertain, and it's been challenging for employees, absolutely, but also employers alike. I mean, imagine, again, many of you on this are thinking about this from the leadership of your team, your organization. Entire companies and organizations are having to rethink and are dealing with all these uncertain challenges and watching people go out the doors and then asking questions about what can we do about it. So there's been this work-life kind of paradigm shift that's been evolving. And part of that is, as you've heard me say in the past, is that it's causing all of us to ask, in my opinion, some good questions. Employees, people, humans, I hope this for every human in the world is that we ask good questions for our own life. And so many people are asking questions about what do they want for their life? What is their desire? What is their vision? How do they want to contribute their skills and their talents to this? And what kind of purpose do they want to be a part of? And so people are asking, just humans are asking that, employees are asking that. And then it also causing all of us as companies and organizations, and many of the companies that I support, I'm in the midst of these robust conversations that we're having of helping them to ask these kind of questions of well, what is... they're asking good questions about not just how do we create a culture where people don't just want to have a job, because we now are realizing that's not what people just want, but how can we continue to be best in class and high performing and accomplish the mission of why we exist as a company organization in the first place, and at the same time be a part of caring for people and creating a culture that other people want to be a part of. And in fact, that our culture is our competitive advantage, because we are going to be so great about creating and taking care of our people that our performance and everything else will follow. And so it's asking good questions. So on today's podcast, we're talking about this idea of developing talent. And we've already, set the stage for this whole Great Resignation. Then we talked about we're talking about the different elements that are within our control in the midst of the Great Resignation. And I've shared the acronym RAD, R-A-D. And on the first, a past podcast, we focused just on the R, which is about retaining talent and how that's within our control. How do we retain the talent we already have? Then we talked on the last podcast about attracting talent and what is within our control in terms of attracting talent. And then today we're talking about the D, lastly, the developing of talent. And developing talent can't just be an off-the-shelf program or video on demand that meets everyone's needs. In my opinion, that's never worked, but more than ever, all the research and study, and certainly my own personal experience within countless teams and organizations, is that doesn't work. Just this kind of one-size-fits-all off-the-shelf program or video on how we develop people, that just doesn't work. And so the best teams that are developing talent are doing it in alignment with the culture that they want, which means they have to have clarity on the first point of what is even that culture that they want, and that they've been through and are leading a proactive participatory process with their people, so that it's not just top down, some leader about what is the culture they want, but internally involving people, helping them participate in what is that culture that we want. We've got to have clarity around that. But then also we need to then be building and developing people in alignment with that culture that we want. It's got to be intentional, and it's got to be authentic. And the reality is people want to be developed. Part of the other research and studies that are emerging during these times is that as people jump from job to job or leave jobs, and where are they looking and what kind of culture do they want to be a part of? They want to be a part of, again, a more meaningful culture, but they also want to be a part of a place that's invested in their own learning and development and helping them grow as a person so that they can be better at what they do. That's what employees are telling us. So during this podcast series, we've been focusing on those three main ways that leaders and companies are doubling down on culture and what is within their control. This acronym RAD: retaining talent, attracting talent, and developing talent. And so today, developing talent. So what are the best leaders and cultures? What do they tend to be doing in this area of developing talent in the midst of this environment around the Great Resignation? Well, here are a few key reminders. I'm going to share 4 key reminders and tips to us about developing talent in this time that we're in right now. Now, these aren't the only things that people are doing, but for the purpose of a short podcast like this, here are 4 key reminders or tips for us for developing talent during these times. 1, people want it. In terms of developing talent, we need to remember this, that people want it. More and more studies and research related to this quote-unquote meaningful work cultures is pointing to the fact that people want to be a part of a culture that helps them learn, helps them develop, helps them grow, and helps them contribute to a culture and a mission greater than themselves. So all the research is telling us that they want it. These people want it. So if you, as your team and your organization, you think about the culture you create is just put your head down and grind, put your head down and just put everybody, and as long as people understand what their job is, to just spin them loose and let them just only go work on that. If that's your mentality and or you think that's what people want, actually, the research is telling us otherwise. That yes, people want autonomy in their job. They don't want people hovering over them and micromanaging everything that they do. We know that. But they also don't want to be out on an island. They want to be a place where their own they are learning, they're developing, they're growing, and they are then also a contributor to something greater. So people want it. That's the first reminder tip around developing talent is people want it. And so we need, not only is it a great strategy from the culture or the organization standpoint, but it's a great strategy in terms of the people that we have of retaining them and attracting people to us is they want to be developed. The second tip and reminder I'd share is it's got to be intentional. It's got to be intentional. And what I mean by that is developing the type of people, the type of leaders, the type of culture that you want within your organization. It won't just magically happen. It won't just magically happen. So just because we have an idea or in a senior leadership meeting or in a board meeting or somewhere on our team is that we have a great conversation and clarity around, well, the type of leaders and the type of people and the type of culture that we want to create. Just because we've had that conversation doesn't mean that it'll magically happen. So teams and organizations that think their culture, their habits, their skills will just magically grow and happen are the ones that look back and wonder, shoot, what happened? Where'd everybody go? Why aren't we developing the culture that we talked about? So as I say in culture shaping, what we allow lingers and what we teach triggers. What we allow lingers and what we teach triggers. And what that means is the habits that we form, the words that we use, the processes or structures that are in place, our mode of operation, those things that we allow that are counter to the culture that we're trying to create, counter to our core values, those things that we allow kind of linger and fester and become negatively, spread throughout our organization. But what we teach, the things that we intentionally teach, trigger a positive chain reaction. So that means we have to be intentional about, no organization, no team, no company is perfect. So of course, we're going to identify those things that maybe we're allowing and those things that are counter to our culture. And so it's not, no place is perfect. So we're always going to have those things. But once we're aware of those things, then we identify, well, what do we need to be teaching differently so that we begin to help people have new language, new habits, new modes of operation, new processes or structure to move forward. So it has to be intentional. We must be intentional about what we are teaching and what we are doing to develop the people, the culture, the leadership, the kind of thinking that we want. The third reminder I would give us around developing talent is to remember that it's all levels. It's all levels. So development isn't just for the front line or the middle managers or the senior leaders or the emerging leaders or those new to the organization. Development is for everyone. Development is for all. From the person that sweeps the floor all the way up to the CEO, or if you're thinking about the upside down triangle we've talked about in the upside down pyramid, then the person at the bottom of the pyramid, the CEO. The best leaders in organizations are strategic and intentional about how they are going to grow and develop the thinking, the acting, and the interacting. Remember, culture is dynamic and created by the way we think, act, and interact every day of their people throughout the organization. Everyone plays a role in developing the culture. And so a strategy around developing people, there needs to be a strategy around how are we developing those frontline folks? How are we doing that in a way that speaks to their role, their experience, those people in the field? We have to be able to not dumb things down in any stretch, but meet them where they are and help them develop and grow wherever they might be in the organization. We need to identify those emerging leaders and have a strategic development path and plan that, again, isn't just an off-the-shelf thing, but is something in alignment with the culture we're trying to create into the future. And then we need to be intentional about developing those emerging leaders in a way that we want. And not only is that a great thing for them and their life and developing them right now for the role they're in, but it's a great retention tool. It's a great for attracting new people to show them that you're going to help them grow and emerge into new roles. We need to have a strategy around middle managers, or the management folks, senior managers. They can't be just because they've gotten to a particular level in the organization doesn't mean they're done developing and growing. And the same thing for the senior team. The best organizations on the planet, that senior team is continuously challenging themselves and are a part of their own development path of making sure that they don't get complacent, that they are connected to that culture they're trying to create, and that they are active in their own development personally, but then also as a team to help drive and supports the culture that they've identified. So everyone plays a role in developing the culture. And the fourth key reminder or tip related to developing talent in the times we're in is I need to remind us that it has to be authentic. It has to be authentic. So it has to be authentic to who you are as a team or company or who you want to become. So the organization that is so scattered and busy and flying around and churning and burning people and really only cares about the result and not the person, for those places to then all of a sudden start talking about caring for people, but yet none of the development is in alignment with what they do, doesn't feel authentic whatsoever. And so it has to be, the development has to be authentic. And it's okay if that's what you want to become, but then as a leadership team and certainly as an organization, you need to then be committed to the development path of realizing, hey, we are trying to slow ourselves down. We are not in performance, but in the way we do business, we don't want to turn and burn people up, right? We want to actually elevate them. And so if that's the case, then we got to enter into an authentic path and a longer term view so that we can change those habits. So with clarity, the best leadership teams are aware of how they want to develop themselves, how they want to develop their people, how they want to develop their cultures authentically for their team and their organization. They aren't trying to become someone else. And so every leader, every company, they have other leaders in every companies that they admire, certainly, other ones that they've been a part of or that they've observed from afar that have inspired them, but they aren't trying to become, just duplicate that group. They want to learn from that group and be inspired by that group and take the very best of what they've learned from somebody else, but they aren't trying to become someone else. They're trying to become the best version of who they are. And part of the role that I play with teams and organizations is helping them, remind them, and help them unearth and discover what is that best version of themselves. What is it that's authentic for them, who they want to become. They can learn from others and be inspired by others, of course, all of us are, but they need to go on the journey as a team in ways that are authentic for them and in alignment with their values. And the best external partners or facilitators or speakers like, authors like myself, they help them do that. They help them realize that it's not just a cookie cutter, same size fits all for every team and organization. We need to help support and elevate and lift up what is it that you authentically are wanting to become. And then let's have some robust conversation and strategy around retaining, attracting, and developing talent in alignment with that. So the 4 key reminders I just shared related to developing talent in the times of this great resignation and everything that's happening in the world are reminding us that people want it, that it's got to be intentional, that it's got to happen at all levels, and we've got to have at least a strategy at all levels. And even if your bandwidth isn't to have them all going at the same time, there's still got to be a strategy around how are we going to do this at all levels. And it's got to be authentic. It's got to be authentic to who you are. So as always, let me leave us with some questions to ponder for this week. What currently exists for developing your people and culture? Part of the first questions in terms of development is you got to step back and ask the question, what currently exists for developing your people and culture? And then to ask the question, is it authentic for your organization and intentional for where you're trying to go? So you may have some internal things in place, but when you think about it, they may A, not be compelling to people, and B, they might not be authentic for really who you are as an organization, and C, it might not be intentional about where you're trying to go. So are the things that you have in place authentic for your organization and intentional for where you're trying to go, the culture you're trying to create? And are all levels involved? Is there a strategy on how to develop people at all levels throughout your team, your organization, your company? Those are some questions to ponder for this week. So breathe in appreciation and gratitude for all that is within our control. Now is a time, even when so much feels out of our control, that we have a chance to positively impact those with us, those on our teams, those on the journey with us. We're all going through this together. So every time we acknowledge that and we do that, it gives energy to other people. We breathe oxygen into ourselves, and we also breathe oxygen into other people. And we know that calibrating our own personal thermostat, if we're calibrating our own thermostat, it begins with our own awareness of how we're feeling, what we're seeing, what we're doing, and then calibrating our response and our behavior based on that for the temperature we want to set. And then being aware of the people, being aware of others, the people around us, the people on our team, throughout our organization, the customers, clients, the people on the street we run into, being aware of their needs, what we see in them, what they might be feeling, and then calibrating our own response and behavior based on that temperature we want to set. We are the thermostats. Our internal temperature sets a temperature externally for others based on our own response and our own behaviors. So I hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and I hope you'll continue to keep tuning in. We've got an amazing, great rest of the season ahead of us, and I know it will help support your own vision, your own mindset of being that authentic leader that you want to be and create the compelling culture that you want. On the next episode of this podcast, we're going to be sharing an interview from my past Thermostat Cultures live event with researcher and author and wonderful human and friend Tamara Miles on the research and study she did about meaningful work cultures. So it'll relate to all the stuff we've just been talking about, and it's a great interview. So I look forward to sharing that with you. Remember, the best leaders, teams, and cultures on the planet stimulate progress by recalibrating their thermostat together. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com. jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.